Hey all, in the last video we talked about factoring trinomials, and now we're going to talk about factoring trinomials that are a little bit more advanced. So in the previous lesson, the leading coefficient, the number in front of x squared, was equal to 1. In this lesson, that's going to be different, and the number before x squared, is not going to be 1. So remember that in our trinomial, the general form is a times x squared plus b times x plus c. So again, in the previous lesson, a was just 1. The number in front of x squared is 1. As you can see in this example, that is not the case. So we're going to do what's called the AC method. And that's because we're going to start by taking the value of a and multiplying it by the value of c. So in this case, we have 7 times negative 8, which gives us negative 56. And we're going to find two factors that multiply to be negative 56 and also add to be negative 26. So the two factors that we're going to use are negative 28 and positive 2. So 2 times negative 28 gives us negative 56, and it also gives us, when we add them together, negative 26. So now we're going to rewrite this trinomial with the original a times x squared, so 7x squared. We're going to do minus 28x plus 2x. So we took our two factors and just put x's next to them and put them into the polynomial. And then we have our minus 8. So the next step takes a little bit of practice. Just like finding factors takes a little bit of practice. Sometimes you might have to play around with a few factors. Now we want to group two pairs of terms. So here we have 4 terms. 1 term, 2, 3, 4. So we want to group 2 terms that we can find the greatest common factor of, and another 2 terms that we can find the greatest common factor of. So luckily, the way I wrote this, I can group 7x squared and minus 28x. And I can group 2x and minus 8. And in each of these pairings, I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor. So here, the greatest common factor is 7x. And just like from our first lesson, one of the factors of 7x squared minus 28x is 7x. The other, if we divide each by 7x, gives us x minus 4. So 7x squared divided by 7x is x. 28x divided by 7x is negative 4. 2x and negative 8, we can factor out a 2. So one factor is going to be 2. 2x divided by 2 is just x. Negative 4 divided by 2, I'm sorry, negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. We have one more step. We can factor out a greatest common factor between these two terms. I now only have 2 terms. Terms are separated by this plus sign. Each of them has x minus 4 in common. That's their greatest common factor. And when I divide each of these terms by x minus 4, I'm left with 7x plus 2. So our whole trinomial factored is x minus 4, 7x plus 2. So I'm going to do another example, and then I'll give you some to practice. So to start, again, we'll multiply a times c. So in this case, 6 times 7. We get 42. And now we need to find two factors that multiply to be 42 and add to be 23. And those two factors are going to be 2 and 21. Again, this takes a little bit of time finding the factors. We might play around with the factors until we get the ones that we need. Again, they multiply to be 42, add to be 23. So we're going to rewrite this. We're going to use the same beginning and the same end. So 6x squared will end with plus 7. And this 2 and 21, each of those gets an x, and it's plus since they're positive values. Now again, I set this up so that I can factor a greatest common factor out of 6x squared plus 2x, and 21x plus 7, I can factor out a greatest common factor. That takes a little bit of practice because you need to see which two terms have something in common. I know that 21 and 7 are both divisible by 7, so those look like two terms that I should pair together. And in fact, the greatest common factor of these two terms, 21x plus 7, is 7, so I can make this 7 times 3x plus 1. Again, 21x divided by 7 is 3x. 7 divided by 7 is 1. The greatest common factor over here between 6x squared plus 2x is 2x. And then when I factor out the 2x, I get 3x plus 1. And after you do that step, if you didn't notice in the first one, I should get, in parentheses, the same thing when I do both factorings, both greatest common factors. Now, in both of these terms, I can factor out the 3x plus 1. And what I have left is 2x plus 7. And that is my trinomial that has a beginning coefficient that's not 1. So in this case, it was 6. 6x squared plus 23x plus 7 factors to be 3x plus 1 times 2x plus 7. Just like in the previous lessons, if I multiplied these two factors together, if I did the distributive property, or FOIL as you might know it, I should get the original polynomial. So go ahead and pause here and try these three. Take your time. Start by multiplying the number that is A times the number that is C. So go ahead and check your work here. I showed all my ACs, and then I showed my factors that I was going to use to rewrite the trinomial in each of these. And then some of these are a little bit tricky. So in this one, the greatest common factor between 2y squared and 4y is 2y. The greatest common factor between y and 2 is simply 1. I can always divide anything by 1. So the greatest common factor between y and 2 for this y plus 2 is 1. And that's where we get the plus 1 times y plus 2. And it's important that y plus 2 be the same as that factor right there. Similarly down here, d and negative 3, the only thing we can divide both of those things by is 1, so that's its greatest common factor. And the last one, negative 10v and plus 10, if I factor the beginning first, I know I need to end up with v minus 1. If I factor out a positive 10 here, I'm going to end up with v plus 1. So I can manipulate this by saying my greatest common factor is negative 10. I'll factor out negative 10 so that this is v minus 1. So go ahead and try these two trinomials using the AC method. And if you have questions, make sure you write them down and ask them in class.